Hello everyone and welcome to this Basics of Psychology introduction video. My name is Dr. Miles Cassius and I'm an Associate Lecturer in Sport and Exercise Psychology here at AUCC University College. Now the purpose of this video is just to introduce some of the basic schools of thought within psychology, as these will be touched upon quite a lot within the units. So it's important that you have a good understanding of these schools as you go through the degree. So what we'll cover today is, first of all, we'll look at an overview of key psychological approaches that will be referenced throughout the course. So again, it's important that you have a good basic understanding of these approaches, that you understand some of the content as we're talking about it and as you're reading it through each of the units. We'll look at some schools of psychology such as psychoanalytic theory, we'll look at behaviorism, we'll look at humanistic theory, and also we'll look at cognitive approaches. So these are some of the major schools that will be referenced throughout your studies. So again, make sure that you have an understanding, at least a basic understanding of some of these schools as you're entering into the program. So first of all, we'll take a quick look at some or a brief history of psychology. So we'll start with the 19th century, where this is where psychology is starting to be recognized as a scientific discipline. So some events that happened here include first experimental psychology lab being open. Now this is an important step because now we can start testing some theories and doing some experiments to check for understanding of different psychological topics. Freud begins offering psychoanalytic therapy, so early stages of a school being developed here. And the American Psychological Association, is established, and again becomes one of the regulating bodies within the US. In the early 1900s, this is where theories began to establish themselves within the scientific field. So starting with Freud, again, furthering his research into unconscious processes and psychopathology, helped to continue to establish the scientific field behind some of these key theories. The British Psychological Society is formed. So again, BPS is an important organization, and this started in the early 1900s. And then behaviorism started to develop out of research in the early 1900s. Now, as we move through to the late 1900s, standardized approaches started to settle. So again, important for the field in terms of replicability, reliability, ensuring that standards are being met. And also some new schools of thought start to emerge. So, for instance, the first diagnostics and statistics manual of mental disorders is published. Now, the DSM is an important step in understanding mental disorders because it starts to organize some of these ideas and standardize criteria for mental disorders. Humanistic psychology is starting to gain ground, and some of those key researchers are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. And also cognitive psychology is introduced, and some key figures start to push forward this school of thought. Now, we'll look at these schools in a little bit more depth, but you'll notice as we talk about each of the schools, you'll see how they kind of develop on from each other and start to see what other schools are doing and approach things in slightly different ways. So we'll start with psychoanalytic theory. So a key author here is Sigmund Freud. And you may or may not be familiar with the Freud's iceberg model, but this school of thought is known for the theory of personality. So Sigmund Freud was really interested in this idea of the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. So he starts with the id. So this is your unconscious mind, and it is the pleasure principle. So this is where you may or you have an unconscious desire to please yourself at certain times. So maybe that's you're very hungry. So your id would encourage you to go and eat at that moment. Now, it may not be acceptable to leave whatever you're doing and go and eat in that moment. So this is balanced out by the ego, and this is part of the conscious mind. So this is where you're adhering to social norms. It's known as the reality principle. So maybe you're in an important meeting with some co-workers, you're very hungry. Is it socially acceptable to stand up and leave that meeting to go and satisfy that need and that want to please yourself and eat some food? May or may not be, depending on your co-workers, but your ego is kind of your defense mechanism in order to control your unconscious mind and some of those desires that might come through. Now, on top of this, you also have your super ego. So these are your rules and standards, your morality principle. So this is where you might have your inner critic. Now, according to Freud, you may have a combat going on between your id and your super ego. They're trying to almost fight to drive you to certain behaviors. So your rational principle, your ego, is constantly trying to balance out these two sides of the equation. Now, when you're working within psychoanalytic theory, what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify some of the maybe immature behaviors that are coming through from the unconscious mind, and increase the defense mechanisms available within the ego to ensure that constructive defense mechanisms are developed in order for an individual to function properly or function to a good level. So you're looking at those unconscious processes which often develop from your younger years, which goes into a little bit more depth in the theory. So if you're interested in looking at how some of these maladaptive behaviors might occur, definitely go and look into psychoanalytic theory a little bit more closely. Now, not everybody was happy with the way that psychoanalytic theory approached psychology, and behaviorism started to develop based on the fact that people wanted to, or researchers wanted, measurable behaviors in order to replicate experiments, etc., to explain what was going on with human behaviors. So again, this school of thought really emphasizes the experiment and the data aspect of psychology to ensure that information is can be replicated, and there's consistent data provided within the field. So some key authors within behaviorism include Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. So you may or may not be familiar with some of the different conditioning principles. So again, as we're talking about these, think about how they're observable and measurable in terms of the behaviors that you're seeing. But starting with Pavlov, he is known for his work on classical conditioning. Now, what classical conditioning shows is within his work with animals. So you can see on the screen, there's the example of an experiment with dogs, is that you can create certain behaviors based off of unrelated stimuli by connecting them in some way. So what he done with the dog was every time he rang a bell, he would then feed the dog. So then the dog would start associating the sound of that bell with being fed, so that even when food wasn't provided, it got to the point that whenever the bell was rung, the dog would drool, anticipating some food. So again, we're observing these behaviors. We can observe and measure them based on the experiment that you're conducting. Now, Watson then comes in and looks at how this can be applied to human behaviors, and particularly within the emotions aspect, and relating unrelated stimuli to certain events to explain why humans might display certain behaviors and have certain emotional responses in situations where they might be struggling. This was then developed further by Skinner, who looked at operant conditioning and looked to explain how you could encourage certain behaviors based on providing positive responses and discourage certain behaviors based on negative responses. So he's known for his work with rats, where he would encourage rats to press a lever and reward them by doing so with food, and had a shock mechanism in place to discourage behaviors that he didn't want to see. So again, looking at this idea that you can replicate this by encouraging behaviors that you want to see with positive responses and discouraging behaviors you don't want to see with negative responses. Now, when you're looking at working with individuals based on a behaviorism perspective, you're looking to correct maladaptive behavior patterns. So you want to identify what's causing those maladaptive behavior patterns, and then encouraging that individual to self-enhance these behaviors to be more suitable for their environment. Now, as the field of psychology continued to grow, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow were some of the key authors for the humanistic response, and they wanted to look at a perspective of humans are naturally born good, and it's their experiences that might drive for negative behaviors to occur based on their experiences. So what this approach does is view humans holistically. So we're not just a biological individual. We're not just an unconscious individual fighting with our ego. We are a whole human. We have control over our actions. We're naturally good. There's lots of different aspects that might impact our functioning. So what you'll see, especially with Maslow's work in hierarchy of needs, is that there's certain things that need to be met in order for us to reach what is known as self-actualization. Now, self-actualization is the ultimate goal of humanistic theory, and that's saying that we're getting to a point where we're able to function and work towards our ideal self. So this is based off of different building blocks, and ultimately, with a humanistic approach, you want to help individuals achieve personal growth and move towards actualization. So you're providing them with the answer, or you're providing them with the opportunities to come up with the answers they need in order to grow themselves and provide direction for their life. So one way of going about that is by increasing conscious experiences and encouraging individuals to take control over their behaviors and start to think about how they can really flourish on their own. They're responsible, as I mentioned with the theory, humans are conscious of their behaviors, so that we want to encourage them to take control of them and use behaviors that will help them towards this idea of self-growth. Now, finally, cognitive theory started to develop gain quite a backing during this period as well. And you have some key authors such as Ulrich Neisser, John Pinier, and Aaron Beck. And what this approach looks at is how humans, or it looks at the cognitive part of humans and how we process and store information that we're perceiving. So it likens it to a computer with looking at how we process information and how we store that information so that we can then make connections with previous experiences to whatever we're experiencing currently, and try to understand that situation so that we can demonstrate certain behaviors in order to overcome your current situation. So as you can imagine from this approach, what you are ultimately trying to look at with individuals is what maladaptive thinking patterns might be occurring, what are they associating with current experiences in that might be causing issues in their current environment. So again, looking at how those thought patterns might be creating connections that may be maladaptive for that individual. So then you go in and try to change those thought patterns to be more productive and more healthy for that individual. Now, that was a brief look at each of those schools. Within the Moodle shell, there'll be some reading for you to do as well, which will look at these ideas in a little bit more depth. So make sure you check those out. If you have any questions about any of these schools of thought, or interested in any other topics of the history of psychology, please do feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Look forward to seeing you within the course shell.